Hello, beautiful souls. Welcome back to our journey of hope and unexpected blessings. I hope your hearts are open today, because what I'm about to share will remind you that sometimes our lowest moments become the doorway to our greatest miracles. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights of the downtown employment agency buzzed overhead like angry wasps, casting a harsh glow over the worn plastic chairs that lined the waiting area. Maya Rodriguez sat hunched in the corner, her thin jacket pulled tight around her shoulders as she clutched a manila folder containing what little remained of her professional life. The folder held 3 copies of her resume, printed on paper so cheap it felt like tissue, and a single letter of recommendation from her former supervisor at the diner that had closed down 2 weeks ago. Maya's stomach growled audibly, a sound that made her cheeks burn with embarrassment even though the waiting room was nearly empty. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning, surviving on nothing but tap water and the occasional free sample from the grocery store down the street from her cramped studio apartment. The apartment she would lose in 5 days if she couldn't come up with 3 months' back rent. Her dark eyes, rimmed with exhaustion, scanned the job postings taped haphazardly to the bulletin board across from her. Most required experience. She didn't have qualifications she couldn't afford to obtain, or connections in a world that seemed determined to keep her locked out. At 24, Maya felt ancient, worn down by a lifetime of struggling just to survive. The employment counselor, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes but tired features, had been apologetic when she'd called Maya in that morning. "I know it's not what you were hoping for," she'd said, sliding a single piece of paper across her desk. "But it's something. The pay is decent, and they're looking for someone immediately." Maya had stared at the job listing with a mixture of hope and disbelief. Executive assistant to the CEO of Sterling Industries. The salary listed was more than she'd ever imagined earning, enough to not just pay her rent, but actually start building a life. The requirements seemed almost too good to be true. No college degree required, just reliability, attention to detail, and the ability to work under pressure. What the listing didn't mention was that Sterling Industries was one of the most prestigious companies in the city, housed in a gleaming tower that scraped the sky and employed some of the most educated, polished professionals Maya had ever seen, from a distance. It also didn't mention that the CEO, David Sterling, had a reputation for being impossibly demanding, having gone through 7 assistants in the past year alone. Maya knew she was unqualified. She knew she had no business even applying for such a position, but desperation had a way of making impossible dreams seem like the only logical choice. The bus ride to Sterling Tower had taken an hour and 20 minutes, requiring 2 transfers and eating up the last of her bus fare. Maya had spent the entire journey trying to calm her nerves, practicing answers to potential interview questions, and attempting to project confidence she didn't feel. She'd worn her only professional outfit, a black skirt suit purchased from a thrift store 3 years ago for a job interview that had led nowhere. The suit was slightly too large and showed signs of wear, but it was clean and pressed. Standing at the base of Sterling Tower, Maya had to crane her neck to see the top floors. The building rose 43 stories into the Seattle sky, its glass facade reflecting the gray clouds that seemed permanently settled over the city. The lobby was a cathedral of marble and steel, with soaring ceilings and abstract art that probably cost more than Maya would make in a lifetime. Security guards in crisp uniforms monitored the flow of professionally dressed people moving through the space with purpose and confidence. Maya felt like an imposter among them, acutely aware of her scuffed shoes and the way her empty stomach made her feel lightheaded. The elevator ride to the 38th floor felt endless. Maya watched the numbers climb steadily upward, each ding marking another step toward either salvation or humiliation. She'd arrived 30 minutes early, hoping to compose herself and perhaps get a sense of the company culture before her interview. The reception area for Sterling Industries' executive floor was a study in understated elegance. Soft grey walls were adorned with awards and recognition plaques, while floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of Elliott Bay and the Olympic Mountains beyond. The receptionist, a woman in her 30s with perfectly styled blonde hair and a smile that seemed professionally calibrated, had directed Maya to a seating area near the windows. That had been 4 hours ago. Maya had watched the sun move across the sky, casting shifting shadows through the massive windows. She'd observed the ebb and flow of employees, noting their confident strides and expensive-looking clothes. She'd memorized every award plaque on the walls and counted the boats in the harbor below until her eyes grew heavy. The receptionist had offered explanations throughout the day, each more apologetic than the last. Mr. Sterling was in an emergency board meeting. There was an unexpected crisis with a major client. He would be with her as soon as possible. Maya had smiled and nodded, expressing understanding she didn't feel, all while her hope slowly transformed into resignation. By 4 o'clock, Maya's exhaustion had reached a breaking point. She hadn't slept more than 3 hours the night before, kept awake by worry and the constant noise from the apartment upstairs. The combination of hunger, stress, and sleeplessness created a fog in her mind that made it increasingly difficult to maintain her professional composure. She'd shifted positions in the elegant waiting chair dozens of times, trying to find a comfortable angle that wouldn't make her look unprofessional. The chair, while beautiful, wasn't designed for extended sitting, and Maya's back ached from maintaining perfect posture for hours on end. At 4:30, the receptionist approached with genuine sympathy in her eyes. "I'm so sorry about this delay," she said quietly. "Mr. Sterling's day has been completely derailed. Would you prefer to reschedule? I completely understand if you need to leave." Maya's heart sank. Rescheduling meant another bus fare she couldn't afford, another day of uncertainty, another night of wondering if she'd be homeless by week's end. But more than that, it meant admitting defeat, accepting that perhaps she really didn't belong in a place like this. "I'd like to wait a little longer, if that's okay," Maya said, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her chest. "I understand that things come up in business. I'm happy to be flexible." The receptionist's smile became more genuine. "Of course. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water? We have a lovely cafe on the 15th floor if you'd like to grab something to eat." Maya's pride warred with her hunger. The mention of food made her stomach clench with longing, but she couldn't afford to buy anything, and she was too embarrassed to admit her situation. "I'm fine, thank you, just grateful for the opportunity." As 5 o'clock approached, the office began to empty. Employees packed up their belongings and headed toward the elevators, many casting curious glances at Maya, who remained steadfast in her chair by the windows. The receptionist prepared to leave as well, gathering her purse and coat while speaking. In hushed tones on the phone, Maya felt her eyelids growing heavy despite her best efforts to stay alert. The warm afternoon sun streaming through the windows created a cocoon of comfort that her exhausted body craved. She'd been fighting fatigue all day, but as the office grew quieter and the adrenaline of waiting began to fade, maintaining consciousness became an increasingly difficult battle. She tried every trick she could think of. She pinched her thigh, discreetly bit the inside of her cheek and shifted positions repeatedly. She reviewed her prepared answers to potential interview questions, trying to keep her mind engaged and active. But her body had reached its limit, pushed beyond endurance by weeks of stress and inadequate nutrition. The last thing Maya remembered was the sound of approaching footsteps and a deep voice speaking to the receptionist about rescheduling tomorrow's meetings. Her eyes had closed just for a moment, she told herself. just to rest them while she continued listening. But consciousness slipped away from her, like water through her fingers, and she fell into the first peaceful sleep she'd experienced in weeks. David Sterling emerged from the conference room, feeling like he'd survived a battle. The emergency board meeting had lasted 6 grueling hours, dealing with a crisis that threatened to undo months of careful negotiations with their largest international client. A shipping delay had cascaded into a series of complications that required immediate attention and creative problem-solving. By the time they'd reached a solution, David's head was pounding, and he wanted nothing more than to go home and collapse. At 32, David had built Sterling Industries from a small family business into a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. His success had come at a cost. Relationships that couldn't survive his demanding schedule, friendships that had withered under the pressure of his responsibilities, and a personal life that existed only in the margins of his professional obligations. David's reputation in the business world was that of a brilliant but demanding leader who expected perfection from himself and everyone around him. He was known for his ability to see solutions where others saw only problems, for his unwavering commitment to quality, and for his inability to tolerate incompetence or laziness. What few people knew was that his exacting standards came not from arrogance, but from a deep sense of responsibility to the thousands of employees who depended on Sterling Industries for their livelihoods. He'd inherited the company from his father at 26, in the wake of a sudden heart attack that had left David reeling and unprepared. The transition had been brutal, with competitors circling like vultures and employees questioning whether someone so young could possibly fill his father's shoes. David had proven them wrong, but the experience had left him with a profound understanding of how quickly success could disappear and how many people could be hurt when leadership failed. As he walked toward his office, David noticed Sarah, his receptionist, gathering her things with unusual haste. She looked up as he approached, her expression a mixture of relief and embarrassment. "Mr. Sterling, I'm so sorry about today," she began, her voice apologetic. "I know you had that interview scheduled, and with everything that happened..." David paused, his exhausted mind struggling to process what she was saying. Interview. He vaguely remembered Sarah mentioning something about an interview that morning, but the day's crisis had driven all non-essential matters from his mind. "The candidate for the assistant position," Sarah continued, seeing his confusion. "She's been waiting all day. I offered to reschedule, but she insisted on staying. I didn't have the heart to make her leave after she'd waited so long." Guilt hit David like a physical blow. He'd completely forgotten about the interview, and someone had spent their entire day waiting for him. It was exactly the kind of inconsiderate behavior he despised in others, and he was appalled to realize he'd been guilty of it himself. "Where is she?" he asked, already looking around the reception area. Sarah gestured toward the seating area. "By the windows. She's right there by the..." David followed her gaze and stopped abruptly. In the corner chair, illuminated by the golden light of the setting sun, a young woman sat with her head tilted back against the chair's high back, her eyes closed in peaceful sleep. Her dark hair had escaped from what had probably been a neat bun that morning, framing a face that was both delicate and strong. Even in sleep, there was something dignified about her posture, as if she was determined to maintain her composure even while unconscious. "How long has she been sleeping?" David asked quietly, not wanting to wake her. Sarah checked her watch. "Maybe 20 minutes? She's been here since noon, Mr. Sterling. She never complained, never asked for anything except permission to wait. I've never seen anyone so patient." David studied the sleeping woman more closely. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Her clothes were professional, but showed signs of wear, and he noticed how thin she looked, as if she hadn't been eating regularly. There was something about her that intrigued him, not just her patience, which was remarkable, but the way she carried herself, even in sleep. There was dignity there, strength hidden beneath obvious exhaustion. "What's her name?" he asked. "Maya Rodriguez," Sarah replied, checking her appointment book. "She's applying for the executive assistant position. Her resume is, well, it's not what we usually see for this role, but something about her seemed different when she called. She was so polite, so eager for the opportunity." David nodded, still watching Maya sleep. He'd been through 7 assistants in the past year, each one leaving for various reasons. Some citing the demanding hours, others claiming the pressure was too intense. Most had been highly qualified on paper, with impressive degrees and stellar references. None had lasted more than 3 months. The truth was that David knew he was difficult to work for. His standards were impossibly high. His schedule was unpredictable, and he had little patience for mistakes. But he also demanded these things of himself, working longer hours than anyone else in the company and holding himself to standards that bordered on perfectionism. He needed an assistant who could match his dedication, someone who understood that excellence wasn't just a goal, but a necessity. Looking at Maya, sleeping peacefully after waiting all day for an interview that might change her life, David felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time: genuine curiosity about another person. What kind of dedication drove someone to wait 8 hours for a job interview? What circumstances had brought her to his office, and what had given her the strength to endure such a long and uncertain day? "Sarah, you can go ahead and leave," David said quietly. "I'll handle this." Sarah hesitated. "Are you sure? I could wake her up and explain that you'll need to reschedule." "No," David said, surprising himself with the firmness of his response. "She's waited long enough. The least I can do is give her the interview she came for." After Sarah left, David found himself alone with the sleeping woman in the quiet office. The setting sun painted everything in warm, golden tones, and the usual sounds of the busy office had faded to a peaceful silence. For the first time in months, David felt his constant tension beginning to ease. He settled into the chair across from Maya, studying her face in the gentle light. She looked younger than he'd expected, probably in her early 20s, with features that spoke of Hispanic heritage and a bone structure that was both elegant and strong. Her hands, folded in her lap, showed signs of hard work, small calluses and healed cuts that suggested she was no stranger to physical labor. David found himself wondering about her story. What had brought her to his office? What dreams was she chasing? And what obstacles had she overcome to get here? There was something about her peaceful expression that made him think of resilience, of someone who had faced difficulties with grace and determination. As he watched, Maya stirred slightly in her sleep, her head tilting to one side. Without thinking, David leaned forward, and Maya's head came to rest gently against his shoulder. She sighed softly in her sleep, seeming to relax even further into the unexpected comfort. David froze, uncertain how to react. His first instinct was to wake her immediately. This level of physical contact with a potential employee was completely inappropriate, but something held him back. Maybe it was the way she looked so peaceful for the first time since he'd noticed her, or maybe it was his own guilt over having kept her waiting all day. Whatever the reason, David found himself sitting perfectly still, allowing Maya to sleep against his shoulder while the sun continued its descent toward the horizon. The minutes passed in comfortable silence. David discovered that having someone sleep so trustingly against him was oddly soothing. It had been months since he'd experienced any kind of physical comfort, and years since he'd felt truly relaxed. His high-pressure lifestyle left little room for genuine human connection. and he'd grown accustomed to a solitude that he'd convinced himself was preferable to the complications of relationships. But sitting there with Maya's weight against his shoulder, David realized how much he'd been missing. There was something profoundly peaceful about the moment, something that made the stress of his demanding day fade into the background. He found himself matching his breathing to hers, letting the rhythm of her sleep calm his own restless energy. As the office grew darker and the city lights began to twinkle beyond the windows, David made a decision that would surprise even him. Rather than wake Maya immediately, he reached carefully into his jacket pocket and withdrew his phone. With his free hand, he typed a message to his evening appointments, cancelling them all. For the first time in years, David Sterling chose to prioritize something other than business. Maya slept peacefully against his shoulder for another hour, and David found himself studying her face in the changing light. Her features were expressive even in sleep. Strong eyebrows that suggested determination, full lips that hinted at warmth and humor, and long lashes that cast delicate shadows on her cheeks. She was beautiful, but it was a natural, unadorned beauty that seemed to come from within, rather than from careful styling or expensive cosmetics. More than her physical appearance, though, David was struck by the sense of character he perceived in her. Even unconscious, she seemed to radiate a quiet strength that intrigued him. What kind of person waited 8 hours for a job interview without complaint? What kind of strength did it take to maintain dignity and grace under circumstances that would have sent most people home in frustration? As the clock neared 7:30, David knew he couldn't delay the inevitable much longer. The cleaning crew would arrive soon, and he needed to either conduct the interview or arrange to reschedule. But he found himself reluctant to break the peaceful spell that had settled over them. Maya began to stir naturally as the office grew darker. Her breathing changed slightly, becoming less deep and regular, and David could sense that she was beginning to wake up. He sat perfectly still, not wanting to startle her as Maya slowly returned to consciousness. The first thing Maya became aware of was warmth. After months of being constantly cold, in her unheated apartment, on the city buses, in the waiting rooms of potential employers, she was experiencing a deep, comfortable warmth that seemed to surround her completely. The second thing she noticed was that she was incredibly comfortable, more relaxed than she'd been in weeks. Slowly, reality began to filter back into her consciousness. She was supposed to be at Sterling Industries. She'd been waiting for an interview. She'd been so tired, and the sun had been so warm, and she'd just closed her eyes for a moment. Maya's eyes snapped open, and she found herself staring directly into the concerned face of a man she didn't recognize. For a moment, confusion reigned as she tried to process what was happening. She was definitely still in the Sterling Industries office. She could see the familiar awards on the walls and the Seattle skyline beyond the windows. But it was dark outside now. The office lit only by the soft glow of security lighting, and she was leaning against someone's shoulder. Maya jerked upright, horror flooding through her as she realized what had happened. She'd fallen asleep during her job interview, or rather, while waiting for her job interview. She'd fallen asleep and somehow ended up using a complete stranger as a pillow. The stranger who was now watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I'm so sorry," Maya gasped, her face burning with embarrassment. "I can't believe I didn't mean to. Oh God, this is so unprofessional." The man she'd been sleeping against was impeccably dressed in an expensive suit that probably cost more than Maya's rent. He had dark hair that was slightly messed up, as if he'd been running his hands through it, and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see everything. His face was handsome in a sharp, angular way, with strong jawline and features that spoke of confidence and authority. "It's all right," he said, his voice deep and surprisingly gentle. "You've had a long day." Maya scrambled to gather her scattered belongings, her manila folder having slipped to the floor while she slept. Her resume pages were scattered, and she could see a coffee stain on one that definitely hadn't been there that morning. Everything about the situation screamed disaster, and Maya felt her last hope for salvation slipping away. "I'm Maya Rodriguez," she said, trying to salvage some semblance of professionalism. "I was here for an interview for the assistant position, but I completely understand if I've missed my opportunity. This is so embarrassing, and I'm truly sorry for falling asleep. It won't happen again." The man studied her for a moment, and Maya was struck by the intelligence in his eyes. There was something almost calculating in his gaze, as if he was evaluating her in ways she couldn't understand. "I'm David Sterling," he said simply. Maya felt the blood drain from her face. David Sterling, the CEO, the man she'd been waiting all day to impress, the person who held her future in his hands. And she'd fallen asleep on his shoulder like a child on a long car ride. "Mr. Sterling," she whispered, mortification making her voice barely audible. "I'm so incredibly sorry. There's no excuse for what happened. I understand completely if you can't consider me for the position after this." David continued to watch her with that unreadable expression. Maya couldn't tell if he was angry, amused, or simply trying to figure out how to get rid of her as quickly as possible. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant sounds of traffic far below. "When did you last eat?" David asked suddenly. The question caught Maya completely off guard. What?" "Food," David clarified, his tone matter-of-fact. "When did you last have a meal?" Maya's cheeks burned even hotter. The last thing she wanted was for this powerful, successful man to know about her desperate circumstances. But something in his eyes, a kindness she hadn't expected, made it difficult to lie. "Yesterday morning," she admitted quietly. David's expression darkened slightly, though Maya couldn't tell if it was directed at her or the situation. He stood up from his chair, moving with the fluid confidence of someone accustomed to command. "That explains the sleeping," he said, not unkindly. "Low blood sugar and exhaustion are a dangerous combination." Maya watched as David walked to his desk and picked up his phone. She couldn't hear what he was saying, but his tone was authoritative and decisive. When he finished the call, he turned back to her. "I've ordered dinner," he said simply. "It should be here in about 20 minutes. We can conduct your interview while we eat." Maya stared at him in disbelief. You still want to interview me after what happened?" David's lips curved into the hint of a smile, the first expression of warmth Maya had seen from him. "Maya, you waited 8 hours for this interview without complaint. You maintained your composure and professionalism even when circumstances were less than ideal. And when you could have easily left, you chose to stay. Those are exactly the qualities I need in an assistant." The relief that flooded through Maya was so intense it made her dizzy. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You have no idea what this opportunity means to me." "Actually," David said, settling back into his chair, "I think I'm beginning to understand exactly what it means. Why don't you tell me about yourself, Maya? What brought you to my office today?" As Maya began to speak, telling David about her background and her determination to build a better life, she had no idea that this moment, this embarrassing, desperate moment where she'd fallen asleep on a stranger's shoulder, would become the foundation for something neither of them could have imagined. She couldn't know that David Sterling, the man known for his exacting standards and cold professionalism, had been moved by her resilience and dignity in ways that would change both of their lives forever. The interview that followed would be unlike any job interview either of them had ever experienced. And by the time Maya left Sterling Tower that night, she would be carrying more than just a job offer. She would be carrying the seeds of a connection that would grow into something neither of them had dared to hope for. But for now, in the quiet office, with the city lights twinkling beyond the windows, Maya simply felt grateful for a second chance and determined to prove that David Sterling's faith in her wasn't misplaced. She had no way of knowing that she'd already proven more to him in one afternoon of patient waiting than most people managed in months of trying to impress him. The story of Maya Rodriguez and David Sterling was just beginning, born from exhaustion and desperation, but destined to become something beautiful and transformative for them both. The first 3 weeks of Maya's employment at Sterling Industries passed in a whirlwind of learning, adaptation, and quiet amazement at how dramatically her life had changed. The executive assistant position came with responsibilities she had never imagined and challenges that pushed her far beyond her comfort zone. Yet each day brought new proof that David Sterling's faith in her hadn't been misplaced. Maya's new office was located directly outside David's corner suite on the 38th floor, positioned perfectly to manage the constant flow of people seeking his attention. The space was elegant and efficient, with a sleek desk that held the latest computer equipment, multiple phone lines, and a scheduling system that seemed to coordinate the movements of half the business world. The view from her window looked out over the bustling streets below, a reminder of how far she'd climbed from those desperate days of job hunting. The salary that had seemed impossibly generous during her interview proved to be well earned. David Sterling operated at a pace that would have challenged even the most experienced professional, and Maya found herself working 12-hour days as a matter of course. His schedule was a complex puzzle of board meetings, client calls, site visits, and strategic planning sessions that often changed with little notice. What might begin as a straightforward day of office meetings could suddenly transform into a flight to Portland for an emergency consultation or an evening negotiation session that stretched past midnight. But Maya thrived in the challenging environment in ways that surprised even her. Her years of juggling multiple jobs had given her an ability to prioritize and multitask that proved invaluable in managing David's complicated professional life. More importantly, her natural empathy and genuine interest in people allowed her to build relationships with clients, vendors, and employees that went far beyond the typical assistant role. Where previous assistants had simply scheduled meetings and answered phones, Maya began to anticipate needs and solve problems before they fully developed. She noticed when a client seemed frustrated during a call and would research solutions to present to David before he even asked. She observed patterns in his schedule and began building in buffer time around particularly demanding meetings, ensuring he had moments to decompress and refocus. David noticed these improvements immediately, though he was careful not to express his appreciation too openly. Years of experience had taught him that praise could lead to complacency, and he couldn't afford to have his professional life disrupted by another assistant who became too comfortable and stopped growing. But privately, he was impressed by Maya's intuitive understanding of business dynamics and her ability to adapt to his demanding style. What struck him most was Maya's genuine care for the people who interacted with Sterling Industries. She remembered personal details about clients' families, followed up on projects with a thoroughness that exceeded expectations, and treated everyone from delivery personnel to board members with the same respectful professionalism. In an industry often marked by superficial relationships and calculated networking, Maya's authentic approach was refreshing and surprisingly effective. The change in David's daily experience was subtle but significant. Where he had once returned to his office between meetings to find a pile of messages and scheduling conflicts, he now found problems resolved and priorities clearly organized. Maya had developed a system of color-coded notes that allowed him to quickly assess the urgency and importance of various matters, and she had negotiated with regular contacts to establish communication preferences that streamlined routine interactions. More than the organizational improvements, though, David found himself looking forward to the brief interactions he had with Maya throughout each day. She had a way of presenting information that was both thorough and concise, and her questions often revealed insights that helped him approach problems from new angles. Unlike his previous assistants, who had seemed intimidated by his intensity, Maya engaged with his ideas and offered thoughtful feedback when appropriate. Their working relationship developed a rhythm that felt natural and efficient. Maya would arrive each morning 30 minutes before David, using the time to review his schedule, prepare briefing materials, and handle any urgent matters that had developed overnight. When David arrived, she would greet him with a summary of the day's priorities and any issues requiring immediate attention. Throughout the day, they maintained an easy communication that allowed them to adapt to changing circumstances without the tension that had marked his previous professional relationships. But it was the small moments between the professional demands that began to reveal deeper layers to both of their personalities. David noticed that Maya always brought lunch from home, carefully portioned meals that spoke of both financial consciousness and genuine care for nutrition. When he commented on the appealing aromas coming from her desk, Maya had shyly offered to share, leading to an impromptu lunch meeting that had been more relaxed and productive than many of his formal business dinners. Maya, meanwhile, observed that David's legendary intensity masked a deep concern for his employees' well-being and the company's impact on the community. She watched him approve charitable donations without fanfare, noticed how he remembered personal milestones for long-time employees, and saw the genuine satisfaction he took in the company's success. The demanding perfectionist she had expected to work for was indeed exacting in his standards, but those standards came from a place of caring rather than ego. Their first real test as a team came during Maya's 4th week, when a major client threatened to cancel a multi-million-dollar contract due to concerns about project delays. The client, a family-owned manufacturing company from the East Coast, had been growing increasingly frustrated with what they perceived as inadequate communication from Sterling Industries. Previous assistants had scheduled the required update calls, but had failed to ensure that the right people were prepared with the right information, leading to a series of unsatisfactory conversations that had damaged the relationship. Maya recognized the severity of the situation when she overheard David's tense phone conversation with the client's CEO. Rather than simply noting the complaint and moving on, she took initiative that went far beyond her job description. She researched the client's concerns thoroughly, compiled detailed progress reports from all relevant departments, and identified specific solutions to address each point of contention. But Maya didn't stop with information gathering. She reached out directly to the client's executive assistant, woman to woman, and learned that much of the frustration stemmed from feeling ignored and undervalued. The client's company prided itself on family-style relationships and personal attention, and Sterling Industries' efficient but impersonal communication style had struck them as dismissive. Armed with this insight, Maya proposed a comprehensive response strategy to David. Rather than simply addressing the technical concerns, she suggested a series of relationship-building measures that would demonstrate Sterling Industries' commitment to the partnership. Her plan included regular progress updates, on-site visits, and small gestures of appreciation that would resonate with the client's values. David was initially skeptical of the soft approach Maya recommended, but her thorough analysis and clear reasoning convinced him to try her strategy. The results exceeded both of their expectations. Not only did the client decide to continue their contract, but they expanded their engagement with Sterling Industries and became one of the company's most enthusiastic advocates. The success of Maya's intervention established her value in a way that went far beyond her basic job responsibilities. David began consulting with her on other challenging client relationships, and Maya found herself taking on quasi-diplomatic roles that utilized her natural empathy and communication skills. She was still very much an assistant, handling scheduling and administrative tasks, but she had become a trusted advisor whose insights influenced significant business decisions. As autumn progressed and Maya settled more fully into her role, she began to see sides of David that few others ever witnessed. The demanding CEO who could intimidate seasoned executives became thoughtful and almost gentle when dealing with employee personal crises. She watched him approve extended leave for a warehouse worker whose child needed surgery, personally call the hospital to ensure the employee's family had everything they needed, and quietly arrange for the company's health insurance to cover experimental treatments not typically included in their plan. Maya also observed David's creative side during their strategy sessions. His mind worked in ways that impressed and sometimes amazed her, finding connections between seemingly unrelated concepts and developing innovative solutions to complex problems. She learned to recognize his thinking patterns and began anticipating the resources and information he would need to fully develop his ideas. These glimpses of David's character made Maya increasingly curious about his life outside the office. He clearly lived alone, given his willingness to work late without concern. For anyone waiting at home, he never mentioned family beyond brief references to his late father, and his social calendar seemed to consist entirely of business-related events. Maya found herself wondering what David did during his rare free time and whether he ever experienced the simple pleasures that she was beginning to rediscover now that her basic needs were secure. David, meanwhile, was becoming increasingly aware of Maya's presence in ways that had nothing to do with her professional competence. He noticed how her face lit up when she talked about her small apartment, which she was slowly transforming from a desperate shelter into a real home. He observed her quiet satisfaction when she mastered new skills or successfully handled challenging situations. Most significantly, he found himself looking forward to their daily interactions in ways that went beyond simple workplace efficiency. The change in David's perspective became clear during a particularly stressful week in November, when a competitor's aggressive moves threatened one of Sterling Industries' key market positions. David had been working 18-hour days, surviving on coffee and determination, when Maya appeared in his office at 9 o'clock one evening with a thermos of homemade soup and a look of gentle but firm concern. "You need to eat something substantial," she said, setting the thermos on his desk along with a spoon and cloth napkin. "And before you tell me you're too busy, remember that making yourself sick won't help the company or anyone else." David had been prepared to brush off her concern and return to his work, but something about Maya's approach stopped him. There was no judgment in her voice, no attempt to control or manipulate him. She was simply offering care because she genuinely wanted him to be well. The soup was amazing, clearly made from scratch with ingredients that spoke of both skill and thoughtfulness. As David ate, Maya quietly organized the papers scattered across his desk, creating order from chaos without disrupting his thought processes. She didn't try to engage him in conversation or demand his attention, but her presence was soothing in a way he hadn't experienced since childhood. When David finished eating, he found himself studying Maya as she worked. Her movements were graceful and efficient, her focus complete as she sorted documents and prepared materials for the next day's meetings. There was something deeply appealing about her competence and care, something that made him wonder what it would be like to come home to such thoughtful attention at the end of difficult days. The thought surprised David with its intensity and clarity. He had dated occasionally over the years, but always women from his social and professional circle who understood the demands of his lifestyle and expected relationships that fit neatly around career obligations. The idea of being cared for by someone who put his well-being ahead of social expectations was both foreign and deeply attractive. Maya felt David's attention and looked up from her organizing, meeting his gaze with a slight smile. "Feeling better?" she asked. "Much better," David replied, and he meant it in ways that went far beyond the physical nourishment of the soup. Their eyes held for a moment longer than strictly professional, and Maya felt her heart rate increase slightly. There was something in David's expression that she hadn't seen before, a warmth and appreciation that made her wonder if their relationship was beginning to evolve beyond the bounds of employer and employee. But Maya was careful not to read too much into the moment. David Sterling was one of the most eligible bachelors in the city, a man who could have his choice of sophisticated, educated women from Seattle's social elite. Maya's transformation from desperate job seeker to competent assistant was remarkable, but it didn't change the fundamental differences in their backgrounds and circumstances. Still, as Maya gathered her things to leave that evening, she felt a flutter of possibility that she couldn't entirely dismiss. The way David had looked at her, the genuine gratitude in his voice, suggested that he was beginning to see her as more than just an efficient employee. Whether that recognition could develop into something deeper remained to be seen, but Maya found herself hoping that it might. David watched Maya leave his office, noting the confident set of her shoulders and the way the hallway lighting caught the highlights in her dark hair. Over the past month, he had watched her transform from the exhausted, desperate woman who had fallen asleep in his reception area into a poised professional who commanded respect from clients and colleagues alike. The change was remarkable, but what impressed him most was that success hadn't changed Maya's fundamental character. She remained kind, thoughtful, and genuine in ways that seemed increasingly rare in his world. As David finally packed up his own work for the evening, he found himself thinking about Maya's small apartment and wondering what she did with her. Evenings now that financial stress no longer dominated her thoughts. Did she read, watch movies, pursue hobbies that had been set aside during her time of struggle? For the first time in years, David felt curious about someone else's personal life in ways that had nothing to do with business strategy or professional networking. The following week brought an opportunity for David to learn more about Maya's life outside the office, when the company's annual charity gala required extensive coordination between his office and the event planning team. Maya threw herself into the project with characteristic thoroughness, but David noticed that she seemed particularly invested in this specific event. When he questioned her about her obvious enthusiasm, Maya explained that she had been volunteering at the children's hospital that would benefit from the gala's fundraising efforts. She had started volunteering during her first weekend after beginning work at Sterling Industries, wanting to give back to the community that had provided her with such an unexpected opportunity. David was intrigued by Maya's volunteer work and asked her to tell him more about the hospital and its needs. As Maya described the children she worked with and the programs that required funding, her passion and compassion became evident in ways that impressed David deeply. She wasn't volunteering for social recognition or networking opportunities, as was common among many of his professional acquaintances. Maya was genuinely committed to helping children who reminded her of her own difficult circumstances, and her involvement was making a real difference in their lives. The conversation about Maya's volunteer work led to David's decision to attend the charity gala personally, something he had not done in previous years. Maya was surprised but pleased by his interest, and she worked even harder to ensure that the event would showcase both the hospital's needs and Sterling Industries' commitment to community support. The night of the gala proved to be a turning point in David and Maya's relationship, though neither of them fully recognized it at the time. Maya had chosen a simple but elegant black dress for the occasion, and when David saw her greeting guests and coordinating with the catering staff, he was struck by how naturally she moved in the sophisticated environment. Throughout the evening, David found himself watching Maya more than paying attention to the various speakers and presentations. She had a genuine warmth that drew people to her, and her conversations with donors and hospital staff alike seemed to energize everyone she encountered. David realized that Maya possessed a rare combination of professional competence and personal authenticity that made her equally effective in boardrooms and charitable venues. During the auction portion of the evening, Maya took the stage to speak about her volunteer experiences at the hospital. Her words were heartfelt and compelling, bringing several audience members to tears as she described specific children whose lives had been transformed by the hospital's care. When the final bid amounts were announced, the evening had raised more money than any previous gala, a success that David knew was largely due to Maya's passionate advocacy. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, David approached Maya near the silent auction tables where she was helping to organize the final paperwork. She looked tired but satisfied, her face glowing with the happiness that came from achieving something truly meaningful. "That was an incredible speech," David said, his voice warm with genuine admiration. "You moved the entire room." Maya smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear in a gesture that David was beginning to recognize as a sign of her slight nervousness. "I just talked about what I see every week at the hospital. Those kids are so brave and they deserve every bit of support we can give them. Would you like to get some coffee?" David asked impulsively. "I mean, if you're not too tired, I'd like to hear more about your work with the children." Maya hesitated for just a moment, aware that accepting David's invitation would cross a line from professional to personal interaction. But the genuine interest in his eyes and her own curiosity about this side of David Sterling convinced her to accept. They found a quiet coffee shop a few blocks from the hotel where the gala had been held, and what David had intended as a brief conversation stretched into 2 hours of the most engaging discussion he'd had in years. Maya told him about individual children she worked with, describing their personalities and dreams with a detail that revealed how deeply she cared about each one. David found himself sharing memories of his own childhood and his father's emphasis on using success to help others. As they talked, David began to understand that Maya's compassion wasn't just an admirable character trait, but a driving force that shaped her decisions and priorities. Her volunteer work wasn't something she did in her spare time, but rather a central part of how she understood her place in the world. This insight helped David recognize why Maya had been so effective in her role at Sterling Industries and why clients responded so positively to her approach. Maya, meanwhile, discovered that David's intensity and high standards came from a deep sense of responsibility and a genuine desire to create positive change through business success. His company wasn't just a profit-generating enterprise, but a vehicle for providing employment, supporting communities, and contributing to causes that mattered. This understanding helped Maya see David's demanding nature in a new light, recognizing it as evidence of his commitment rather than mere perfectionism. When they finally parted that evening, both David and Maya felt that something significant had shifted in their relationship. They had moved beyond the professional roles that had defined their interactions and begun to see each other as complete individuals with depth, complexity, and genuine mutual respect. The weeks that followed were marked by an increasing ease and comfort in their daily interactions. David began asking for Maya's opinions on matters beyond her direct responsibilities, and Maya felt confident enough to offer suggestions and insights that went beyond simple task completion. Their conversations became more personal, touching, on books they had read, places they hoped to travel, and dreams they were working to achieve. David learned that Maya was taking evening classes in business administration, using her new financial stability to pursue education that had been impossible. During her years of survival-focused employment, he offered to adjust her schedule to accommodate her studies and was impressed by her determination to advance her knowledge and skills even while working demanding hours. Maya discovered that David's few personal relationships were complicated by the demands of his career and the expectations that came with his wealth and status. He spoke carefully about the loneliness that often accompanied success and the difficulty of finding people who were interested in him rather than his resources or connections. These revelations created a foundation of understanding and mutual support that strengthened their professional partnership while opening possibilities for something deeper and more personal. Neither David nor Maya was ready to acknowledge the romantic potential in their growing connection, but both felt the undeniable chemistry that was developing between them. As December approached and Maya reflected on the transformation that had occurred in her life since that desperate day when she had fallen asleep in Sterling Industries' reception area, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the opportunities she had been given. But more than gratitude for her changed circumstances, Maya felt a growing affection for the man who had seen potential in her when she could barely see it in herself. David, meanwhile, found himself thinking about Maya during his rare quiet moments, wondering what she was doing and looking forward to their next interaction. He had never experienced such a natural, comfortable connection with another person, and he was beginning to suspect that Maya's impact on his life went far beyond her professional contributions. The foundation for a deeper relationship had been established through shared work, mutual respect, and growing personal connection. What neither David nor Maya could predict was how the challenges and complications that lay ahead would test the strength of their bond and ultimately reveal the true depth of their feelings for each other. But for now, as autumn gave way to winter and their partnership continued to flourish, both David and Maya felt a sense of possibility and hope that had been missing from their lives for far too long. The story that had begun with exhaustion and desperation was evolving into something beautiful and transformative, setting the stage for the trials and triumphs that would define their future together. The first sign of trouble came on a crisp December morning when Maya arrived at the office to find Patricia Caldwell, David's former fiancée, sitting in the reception area with the casual confidence of someone who belonged there. Patricia was everything Maya was not: polished, sophisticated, and connected to Seattle's most influential families through generations of wealth and privilege. Her platinum blonde hair was styled in a perfect chignon. Her designer coat probably cost more than Maya's monthly salary, and her smile carried the kind of practiced warmth that came from years of high society networking. Maya had heard whispers about Patricia from other employees, fragments of conversations that painted a picture of a relationship that had ended badly 2 years earlier. The details were scarce, but the general consensus was that Patricia had left David for a lucrative business opportunity in New York, only to return when that venture failed to meet her expectations. "You must be Maya," Patricia said, rising gracefully from her chair as Maya approached. "I'm Patricia Caldwell. David and I have a history together, and I was hoping to surprise him this morning." There was something in Patricia's tone that made Maya instantly wary, a subtle emphasis on the word history that suggested possession and prior claim. Maya maintained her professional composure, but she felt a knot of unease forming in her stomach. "Mr. Sterling has a full schedule this morning," Maya replied diplomatically. "Would you like me to check if he has any availability later in the week?" Patricia's laugh was musical and dismissive. "Oh, darling, David will always make time for me. We have an understanding that goes back years. Why don't you just let him know I'm here?" Before Maya could respond, David emerged from his office, clearly having heard Patricia's voice through his open door. His expression was carefully controlled, but Maya noticed the subtle tension in his shoulders and the way his jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. "Patricia," David said, his tone neutral, "this is unexpected." Patricia moved toward David with the fluid grace of someone completely comfortable in elegant spaces, and Maya watched as she placed a perfectly manicured hand on David's arm in a gesture that spoke of intimate familiarity. "I know I should have called," Patricia said, her voice taking on a softer, more personal quality. "But I wanted to tell you in person that I'm back in Seattle permanently. The New York venture didn't work out as planned, and I realized that everything I really want is right here." Maya felt as though she was intruding on a private moment, but her position at her desk made it impossible to leave without drawing attention to herself. She tried to focus on her computer screen, but she couldn't help but notice the way Patricia looked at David, with an intensity that suggested deep emotional investment. David's response was measured and careful. "I see. Well, I hope your transition back to Seattle goes smoothly. If you'll excuse me, I have a conference call in 10 minutes that I need to prepare for." But Patricia wasn't deterred by David's professional distance. "Actually, I was hoping we could have lunch today. There are things we need to discuss, important things about our future. I know I hurt you when I left, David, but I've learned so much about what really matters." Maya watched David's face carefully, looking for any sign of how Patricia's words were affecting him. His expression remained neutral, but she could see the conflict in his eyes, the struggle between past feelings and present circumstances. "My schedule is completely booked today," David said finally. "Maya, could you check my calendar for availability this week?" Maya's heart sank as she realized David was actually considering meeting with Patricia, despite his obvious discomfort. She pulled up his calendar, scanning the appointments with a heavy feeling in her chest. "You have a window Thursday afternoon," Maya said quietly, "between 3 and 4:30. "Perfect," Patricia said before David could respond. "I'll make a reservation at Le Bernardin. We can catch up properly there." After Patricia left, the office felt different to Maya, charged with an undercurrent of tension and uncertainty that hadn't existed before. David retreated to his office and closed the door, something he rarely did during normal business hours. Maya tried to focus on her work, but she found herself distracted by questions about David's past with Patricia and what her return might mean for their own developing relationship. The rest of the week passed in a strange atmosphere of careful normalcy. David maintained his professional demeanor, but Maya sensed a distance that hadn't been there before. Their easy conversations became more formal, and the warm glances they had begun sharing were replaced by polite but impersonal interactions. Maya told herself that she had no right to feel jealous or concerned about David's personal life. She was his assistant, nothing more, regardless of the growing feelings she had been trying to ignore. But the rational part of her mind couldn't overcome the emotional reality of watching the man she was falling in love with reconnect with someone from his past. Thursday afternoon arrived with unseasonable warmth, and Maya watched from her office window as David left for his lunch with Patricia. He looked handsome, but troubled, dressed in his finest suit with an expression that suggested he was heading into battle rather than a pleasant reunion. Maya tried to stay busy during David's absence, but she found herself checking the clock repeatedly and wondering how the meeting was progressing. When David returned 3 hours later, his face was unreadable, but Maya noticed the slight dishevelment of his usually perfect appearance and the way he avoided making eye contact with her. "How did it go?" Maya asked gently, unable to suppress her concern despite her efforts to maintain professional boundaries. David paused at her desk, seeming to struggle with how much to share. "It was complicated," he said finally. "Patricia wants to resume our relationship. She's made it clear that she considers our engagement to have been postponed rather than ended." Maya felt her heart sink, but she managed to keep her voice steady. "And how do you feel about that?" David looked at Maya for a long moment, and she saw confusion and conflict in his eyes. "I'm not sure," he admitted. "Patricia and I had plans for a future together. When she left, it felt like my whole life had been derailed. Now she's back, and she's saying all the things I wanted to hear 2 years ago." The honesty in David's response was both appreciated and devastating to Maya. She understood that David was trying to process complex emotions and that his confusion was natural given the circumstances. But hearing him acknowledge Patricia's appeal felt like a physical blow to her own hopes and feelings. "You should take whatever time you need to figure things out," Maya said, proud of how calm she managed to sound. "Personal decisions are never easy, especially when they involve someone who was such an important part of your life." David nodded, clearly grateful for Maya's understanding response. But as he headed into his office, Maya felt the foundation of everything she had been, building with David, beginning to crumble beneath her feet. The following weeks were marked by Patricia's increasing presence in David's life and by extension in Maya's daily experience. Patricia began appearing at the office regularly, sometimes for scheduled meetings with David and sometimes simply to drop by and chat. She was always impeccably dressed and perfectly poised, treating Maya with a friendly condescension that made it clear she considered her a temporary fixture in David's professional life. Maya watched as Patricia worked to re-establish herself in David's world, attending business dinners as his guest, accompanying him to social events, and gradually reclaiming the position of prominence she had held before her departure. Patricia's strategy was subtle but effective, reminding David of their shared history while positioning herself as the natural choice for his future. What troubled Maya most was how David seemed to be responding to Patricia's campaign. The warmth and openness he had shown toward Maya began to fade, replaced by a professional distance that felt like a rejection of everything they had been building together. Their conversations became strictly business-focused, and the personal moments that had meant so much to Maya disappeared entirely. Maya tried to understand David's perspective, recognizing that Patricia represented stability and social acceptance in ways that Maya never could. Patricia moved effortlessly in David's world of corporate events and high society gatherings, while Maya still felt like an outsider learning to navigate unfamiliar territory. The differences in their backgrounds became more apparent as Patricia's presence highlighted everything Maya lacked in terms of education, connections, and cultural sophistication. But what hurt Maya most was the way David seemed to be pulling away from her emotionally, as if their growing connection had been a temporary distraction rather than something meaningful. She began to question whether she had misinterpreted David's interest, wondering if his kindness toward her had been nothing more than professional courtesy rather than genuine affection. The situation reached a crisis point during the company's annual holiday party, an elaborate affair held at Seattle's most prestigious hotel. Maya had been looking forward to the event for weeks, seeing it as an opportunity to celebrate the successful year they had shared and perhaps to reclaim some of the closeness that had been lost since Patricia's return. Maya had splurged on a new dress for the occasion, a deep blue gown that complemented her coloring and made her feel confident and elegant. She had spent extra time on her hair and makeup, wanting to look her best for what felt like an important evening. But when Maya arrived at the party, she immediately saw David and Patricia together near the entrance, looking like the perfect power couple as they greeted other guests. Patricia was stunning in a silver gown that probably cost more than Maya's monthly rent, and her possessive hand on David's arm sent a clear message about their relationship status. Maya felt suddenly foolish for thinking she could compete with someone like Patricia, and the confidence she had felt about her appearance evaporated as she compared herself to David's sophisticated companion. She retreated to a corner table, nursing a glass of wine and watching the festivities with a heavy heart. Throughout the evening, Maya observed David and Patricia's interactions with growing dismay. They moved through the party like seasoned partners, engaging in conversations with important clients and community leaders with an ease that spoke of years of practice. Patricia clearly knew everyone and was known by everyone, fitting seamlessly into David's professional and social world. But what struck Maya most was how different David seemed when he was with Patricia. The intensity and focus that characterized his usual demeanor were replaced by a more relaxed, social persona that Maya had never seen before. He laughed more easily, engaged in small talk with apparent enjoyment, and seemed genuinely comfortable in ways that suggested Patricia brought out sides of his personality that remained hidden in other contexts. Maya began to realize that perhaps Patricia wasn't just David's past, but also his natural match, someone who could complement his life and ambitions in ways that Maya never could. The thought was devastating, but Maya forced herself to acknowledge the possibility that David's confusion about Patricia's return might resolve in favor of resuming their relationship. As the evening progressed, Maya found herself feeling increasingly isolated and out of place. Her colleagues were friendly enough, but most of the conversations revolved around topics and experiences that highlighted her outsider status. She didn't have stories about European vacations or private school memories, and her cultural references came from a very different world than the one inhabited by most of Sterling Industries' professional staff. Maya was preparing to leave early when David approached her table, looking concerned and slightly guilty. "Maya, I've been looking for you all evening," he said, taking the seat across from her. "Are you enjoying the party?" Maya managed a smile that she hoped looked genuine. "It's lovely. You and Patricia make a wonderful impression together. I can see why everyone is so pleased to see her back in Seattle." David's expression grew more serious. "Maya, I want you to know that Patricia's return doesn't change anything about your position here or the value you bring to the company. You've become an essential part of Sterling Industries, and I hope you understand how much I appreciate everything you do." The words were meant to be reassuring, but they felt like a gentle dismissal to Maya. David was making it clear that their relationship would remain strictly professional, that whatever personal connection had been developing between them was now off limits. "I understand completely," Maya replied, maintaining her composure despite the pain in her chest. "You have a history with Patricia, and it makes sense that you would want to explore the possibility of rekindling that relationship. She's clearly someone who fits naturally into your world." David looked uncomfortable with Maya's response, as if he wanted to say something more but couldn't find the right words. "Maya, But before David could continue, Patricia appeared beside their table, sliding her arm through David's with practiced ease. "Darling, the Hendersons are leaving and they wanted to say goodbye," Patricia said, her tone pleasant but firm. "We should go speak with them before they go." David looked torn between continuing his conversation with Maya and accommodating Patricia's request. After a moment's hesitation, he stood up, his expression apologetic. "We'll talk more tomorrow," David said to Maya. "Enjoy the rest of the party." Maya watched them walk away together, and she felt the last of her hopes crumble. The message was clear. Patricia had reclaimed her place in David's life, and Maya needed to accept that her role would remain strictly professional. The weeks that followed were among the most difficult of Maya's life. She continued to perform her job with professional excellence, but the joy and enthusiasm she had felt for her work began to fade. Every day brought new evidence of David and Patricia's rekindled relationship, from the flowers that Patricia sent to the office, to the social events they attended together, to the way David's mood seemed lighter and more optimistic. Maya tried to be happy for David, recognizing that Patricia clearly made him content in ways that were important to him. But watching the man she loved build a future with someone else was emotionally devastating, and Maya struggled to maintain her composure during their daily interactions. The situation became even more complicated when Patricia began making subtle suggestions about changes to David's office operations. She questioned Maya's qualifications and experience, suggesting that David might benefit from an assistant with more formal education and sophisticated social connections. Patricia's comments were always phrased as helpful suggestions rather than direct criticism, but their intent was clear. Maya realized that Patricia saw her as a threat, not professionally, but personally. Despite David's apparent choice of Patricia over Maya, Patricia recognized the connection that had developed between David and his assistant and was working to eliminate any possibility of future complications. The pressure from Patricia's campaign began to take its toll on Maya's confidence and well-being. She started questioning her abilities and wondering if perhaps Patricia was right about her limitations. Maybe David did need someone more qualified, someone who could match his intellectual capabilities and social requirements. Maya's self-doubt was compounded by financial pressures that she had thought were behind her. Her mother in Phoenix had fallen ill and needed expensive medical treatments that weren't covered by insurance. Maya found herself faced with the choice between helping her family and maintaining the financial stability she had worked so hard to achieve. The medical bills were substantial, and Maya's salary, while generous by her previous standards, wasn't enough to cover both her own expenses and her mother's treatment costs. She began working additional hours, taking on freelance administrative work in the evenings and weekends to earn extra money. The exhaustion from working multiple jobs while maintaining her demanding position at Sterling Industries began to affect Maya's performance. She made small mistakes that she would never have made before, missed details that would normally have caught her attention, and struggled to maintain the level of excellence that had become her trademark. David noticed the change in Maya's work, quality, but he misinterpreted the cause. Influenced by Patricia's suggestions about Maya's limitations, he began to wonder if perhaps his assistant was reaching the natural limits of her capabilities. The thought was disappointing, but it seemed to confirm Patricia's assessment that Maya had been promoted beyond her actual qualifications. Maya was painfully aware of David's growing dissatisfaction with her performance, but she felt trapped by circumstances beyond her control. She couldn't explain about her mother's illness without seeming to make excuses, and she couldn't admit to working additional jobs without appearing disloyal to Sterling Industries. The final crisis came when Maya made a significant scheduling error that resulted in David missing an important client meeting. The mistake was the result of exhaustion and distraction, but it had serious consequences for a major business relationship that David had been cultivating for months. David's disappointment was evident when he called Maya into his office to discuss the error. His tone was professional but cold, and Maya could see the frustration and doubt in his eyes. "Maya, this kind of mistake is completely unacceptable," David said, his voice carrying a sharpness that Maya had never heard directed at her before. "I rely on you to manage my schedule accurately, and this error has damaged an important business relationship." Maya felt tears threatening, but she forced herself to maintain her composure. "I understand completely, and I take full responsibility for the mistake. It won't happen again." David studied her for a long moment, and Maya could see him weighing his words carefully. "Maya, I've noticed a decline in your work quality over the past few weeks. I'm beginning to wonder if perhaps this position has become too demanding for you." The suggestion felt like a physical blow to Maya, even though she had been expecting something like it. She had worked so hard to prove herself worthy of David's trust. And now that trust was eroding because of circumstances she couldn't control. "I understand your concerns," Maya said quietly. "If you feel that my performance isn't meeting your standards, then perhaps it would be best for me to seek other opportunities." David looked surprised by Maya's response, as if he hadn't expected her to accept his implied criticism so readily. For a moment, his professional mask slipped, and Maya saw something that looked like regret in his eyes. But before David could respond, Patricia appeared in the doorway, her timing so perfect that Maya suspected she had been listening to their conversation. "Am I interrupting something important?" Patricia asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "Maya and I were just discussing some performance issues," David said, his professional demeanor returning. "Nothing that can't be resolved." Patricia's smile was sympathetic but knowing. "I'm sure Maya is doing her best. Not everyone is cut out for the demands of executive-level support. There's no shame in recognizing one's limitations." Maya felt a surge of anger at Patricia's condescending tone, but she forced herself to remain silent. She could see the game that was being played, and she knew that any response would only make her look defensive and unprofessional. "I should get back to work," Maya said, standing up from her chair. "If you'll excuse me." As Maya left David's office, she could hear Patricia's voice behind her, speaking in low, concerned tones about the challenges of finding reliable support staff. Maya didn't need to hear the specific words to understand that Patricia was reinforcing the narrative of Maya's inadequacy. That evening, Maya sat in her small apartment, staring at the medical bills spread across her kitchen table and trying to figure out how to handle the impossible situation she found herself in. Her mother needed the money for treatment, her job. Performance was suffering because of her exhaustion, and the man she loved was building a future with someone else. Maya realized that she had reached a crossroads that would define the rest of her life. She could continue trying to juggle multiple demands and probably fail at all of them, or she could make the difficult decision to step away from Sterling Industries and find a more manageable path forward. The thought of leaving David and the job that had transformed her life was heartbreaking, but Maya was beginning to recognize that staying might ultimately be more destructive than beneficial. Patricia's influence was growing stronger every day, and Maya's position was becoming increasingly untenable. As Maya contemplated her options, she felt the weight of all the dreams and hopes she had built around her relationship with David and her career at Sterling Industries. The fairy tale that had begun with falling asleep on a stranger's shoulder was coming to an end, and Maya wasn't sure she had the strength to fight for a future that seemed increasingly unlikely. But even as Maya considered the possibility of walking away from everything she had worked so hard to build, she couldn't shake the feeling that there were still truths to be uncovered and choices to be made that might change everything. The story of her relationship with David was far from over, and Maya sensed that the real test of their connection was still to come. Maya's decision to resign from Sterling Industries crystallized during a sleepless night spent calculating medical bills and contemplating her dwindling options. The math was unforgiving. Her mother's treatment would require her full attention and financial resources, and her deteriorating performance at work made it clear that trying to balance both was unsustainable. With heavy heart but clear resolve, Maya typed her resignation letter in the pre-dawn darkness, each word feeling like a small death of the dreams she had built around her life with David. The letter was professional and brief, citing family obligations that required her immediate attention without going into details that might seem like excuses. Maya planned to submit it first thing Monday morning, giving David 2 weeks' notice to find and train her replacement. She had already begun researching temporary employment agencies that could provide immediate income while she figured out her next steps, but fate intervened before Maya could execute her plan. Sunday evening brought a frantic phone call from the hospital in Phoenix. Her mother had taken a sudden turn for the worse and was being rushed into emergency surgery. Maya didn't hesitate. She threw essentials into a suitcase, used her savings to book the next available flight, and left for the airport without stopping to notify anyone at Sterling Industries. The flight to Phoenix felt endless, every minute stretching like an hour, as Maya worried about her mother's condition and agonized over leaving Seattle without explanation. She tried calling David's office line to leave a voicemail, but hung up before speaking, realizing she had no idea how to explain the situation, without revealing the financial desperation she had hidden for weeks. Maya arrived at Phoenix General Hospital as dawn was breaking over the desert landscape. Her mother was still in surgery, and the waiting room became Maya's world for the next 18 hours. The surgeon eventually emerged with cautiously optimistic news. The operation had been successful, but recovery would be lengthy and require intensive care that would stretch for months. During the 3 days Maya spent at her mother's bedside, her phone buzzed repeatedly with calls from Sterling Industries. Sarah from reception, various department heads, and finally David himself left increasingly concerned messages asking about her whereabouts and well-being. Maya listened to each voicemail with growing guilt, but she felt paralyzed by the complexity of her situation and unsure how to explain her abrupt departure. David's messages progressed from professional concern to personal worry. His final voicemail, left Thursday evening, carried a tone Maya had never heard from him before, vulnerability mixed with frustration and something that sounded almost like fear. "And Maya, wherever you are, please just let me know you're safe," David's voice said through her phone speaker. "I don't care about work schedules or explanations. I just need to know you're okay. Whatever's happening, we can figure it out together. Please call me." The emotion in David's voice broke through Maya's defensive walls and forced her to confront feelings she had been trying to suppress. Despite Patricia's presence and the professional distance that had developed between them, David still cared about her as a person. His concern seemed genuine and deeply felt, suggesting that their connection hadn't been entirely severed by recent complications. But Maya's mother's condition remained critical, and the financial reality of the medical expenses made returning to Seattle seem impossible, even if David was willing to overlook her unexplained absence. The hospital's billing department had made it clear that insurance would cover only a fraction of the treatment costs, leaving Maya facing debts that would take years to repay even with her Sterling Industries salary. Maya was struggling with these impossible choices when an unexpected visitor appeared in the hospital waiting room Friday afternoon. David Sterling, looking tired and worried, walked through the doors carrying a bouquet of flowers and wearing an expression of relief mixed with concern. "How did you find me?" Maya asked, standing up from her chair in shock. "Your emergency contact information listed your mother," David said simply. "When you didn't respond to any of our calls, I was worried something terrible had happened. The hospital confirmed you were here, so I caught the first flight to Phoenix." Maya felt tears welling up as the full impact of David's gesture hit her. He had flown across the country to check on her welfare, leaving his demanding schedule and Patricia's expectations behind to ensure she was safe. The action spoke louder than any words about his true feelings and priorities. "My mother had emergency surgery," Maya explained, her voice shaking with exhaustion and emotion. "I should have called, but everything happened so fast and I didn't know how to explain." David stepped closer, his expression softening with understanding. "You don't need to explain anything. Is she going to be okay?" Maya nodded, though tears continued to flow. "The surgery was successful, but recovery will take months. The medical bills are overwhelming and I can't afford. I was going to resign anyway because I can't handle everything." David's expression grew troubled as he began to understand the scope of Maya's situation. "Maya, why didn't you tell me you were dealing with a family crisis? I could have helped, could have arranged time off or financial assistance through the company's emergency fund." The kindness in David's voice only made Maya cry harder. "I couldn't ask for help. You already think my performance has been declining, and Patricia keeps suggesting I'm not qualified for my position anyway. I didn't want to seem like I was making excuses." David's face darkened at the mention of Patricia's influence on Maya's perception of her situation. "Patricia has no authority over your employment or performance evaluation, and your recent difficulties make complete sense now that I understand what you've been dealing with." David guided Maya to a quiet corner of the waiting room where they could speak privately. For the first time in weeks, Maya felt safe enough to tell him everything. Her mother's declining health, the financial pressure, the exhaustion from working multiple jobs, and her growing certainty that she didn't belong in his sophisticated world. David listened without interruption, his expression growing more serious with each revelation. When Maya finished, he was quiet for a long moment, clearly processing the full scope of what she had been handling alone. "Maya, I need you to understand something," David said finally, his voice intense but gentle. "Your value to Sterling Industries, and to me personally, has nothing to do with your background or education. You've brought skills and perspectives to the company that can't be taught in business school. The decline in your performance wasn't because you're unqualified. It was because you were carrying an impossible burden without support." David's words provided some comfort, but Maya still felt the weight of practical realities. "Even if that's true, I can't abandon my mother when she needs me most. And I can't afford to maintain my apartment in Seattle while paying for her medical care here." "What if you didn't have to choose?" David asked. "What if we could find a solution that allows you to take care of your mother while maintaining your career?" Maya looked at David skeptically, unable to imagine how such an arrangement could work. "I don't see how that's possible. My mother will need months of care, and I can't commute between Phoenix and Seattle." David was quiet for a moment, and Maya could see him working through possibilities in his mind. "Sterling Industries has been considering expanding our Southwest operations. What if we opened a satellite office in Phoenix with you as the regional coordinator? You could work remotely most of the time and travel to Seattle only when absolutely necessary." The proposal was so unexpected and generous that Maya couldn't immediately process it. "You would create a position just to accommodate my situation?" "I would create a position to retain a valuable employee whose skills and dedication have proven essential to company operations," David corrected. "The Southwest expansion has been on our strategic planning list for 2 years. Your situation simply provides the catalyst to move forward with those plans." Maya felt a surge of hope, but practical concerns remained. "David, that's incredibly generous, but I still can't afford the medical expenses on my current salary, even with reduced living costs in Phoenix." David's expression became more determined. "The regional coordinator position would come with a significant salary increase and enhanced medical benefits that would cover your mother's treatment. Sterling Industries has excellent health insurance options for family members of senior staff." The offer was so comprehensive and life-changing that Maya struggled to believe it was real. "Why would you do all this for me?" David looked directly into Maya's eyes, and she saw an intensity there that made her heart race. "Because losing you would be the biggest mistake I could make, both professionally and personally. You've become indispensable to Sterling Industries, but more than that, you've become important to me in ways that go far beyond business." The admission hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that neither of them had been willing to acknowledge before. Maya felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble as she recognized the sincerity in David's voice and expression. "What about Patricia?" Maya asked quietly. "She's been working to re-establish her relationship with you, and she's made it clear that she doesn't think I belong in your world." David's expression grew troubled, and Maya could see him struggling with complex emotions. "Patricia is part of my past, and I can't pretend that history doesn't matter, but these past few weeks have made me realize that trying to recreate something that ended for good reasons isn't the path to happiness." "Has something changed?" Maya asked, sensing there was more to David's statement. David ran his hand through his hair, a gesture Maya recognized as a sign of his internal conflict. "Patricia's return forced me to confront feelings I had been avoiding. I thought I wanted the stability and familiarity she represented. But spending time with her again has shown me how much I've changed since our relationship ended." David paused, seeming to gather his thoughts before continuing. "The person I was when Patricia and I were together was focused entirely on meeting external expectations and maintaining appearances. The person I've become, largely because of your influence, cares more about substance than style, more about genuine connection than social positioning." Maya felt her heart pounding as she processed David's words. "Are you saying that Patricia isn't what you want anymore?" "I'm saying that Patricia represents a life I thought I was supposed to want, but you represent a life I actually do want," David said, his voice growing stronger with conviction. "Working with you, getting to know you, seeing your compassion and strength and intelligence, it's shown me what real partnership looks like." The confession was everything Maya had hoped to hear but hadn't dared to expect. "David, I care about you more than I should. More than is probably appropriate given our professional relationship, but I'm terrified that we're from such different worlds that any relationship between us is doomed to fail." David moved closer, taking Maya's hands in his. "Maya, the differences in our backgrounds don't matter as much as the similarities in our values and goals. You've made me a better person and a better leader. You've brought warmth and meaning to my life that I didn't even realize was missing." Before Maya could respond, David continued with growing urgency. "I know the timing is terrible with your mother's illness and all the uncertainty you're facing. I don't expect you to make any decisions about us right now, but I need you to know that whatever happens, I want to be part of your life. I want to support you through this crisis and whatever challenges come after." Maya felt tears streaming down her face, but for the first time in weeks, they were tears of relief and hope rather than despair. "I want that too," she whispered. "I want it more than I've ever wanted anything." David pulled Maya into his arms, holding her close as she cried out weeks of accumulated stress and fear. For the first time since arriving at the hospital, Maya felt like she wasn't facing her mother's illness alone. She had support, not just financial but emotional, from someone who genuinely cared about her well-being. When Maya's tears finally subsided, David pulled back to look at her face. "I have something to tell you about Patricia," he said, his expression serious. "I ended things with her permanently yesterday morning, before I found out about your mother's situation." Maya's eyes widened in surprise. "You did?" David nodded. "I realized that I was trying to force feelings that simply weren't there anymore. Patricia is a remarkable woman, but she's not the right woman for me. You are." The declaration was simple but profound, and Maya felt the last of her doubts melting away. "What made you realize that?" "A lot of small things that added up to a clear picture," David said. "But the deciding factor was how empty my life felt when you started pulling away. Patricia's presence couldn't fill the void that your absence created. That's when I knew that what I feel for you is real and irreplaceable." Maya leaned into David's embrace, finally allowing herself to believe that their relationship could overcome the obstacles that had seemed insurmountable just hours before. "I love you," she said quietly, the words feeling both natural and revolutionary. "I love you too," David replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I think I've been falling in love with you since that first day when you fell asleep on my shoulder, but I was too focused on protecting myself to recognize what was happening." They sat together in the hospital waiting room, holding each other and planning a future that had seemed impossible just days before. David's presence transformed Maya's perception of her situation from a crisis to be endured alone into a challenge to be overcome together. Over the following days, David proved the sincerity of his commitment through actions that went far beyond words. He contacted the hospital's billing department and arranged for Sterling Industries' corporate insurance to cover Maya's mother's treatment under their Family Emergency Assistance Program. He worked with his legal team to fast-track the Southwest expansion plans, creating a legitimate business justification for Maya's new position that would satisfy regulatory requirements and board oversight. Most importantly, David spent time getting to know Maya's mother, sitting beside her hospital bed and engaging in conversations about Maya's childhood, her dreams, and her character. Maya watched with growing love as David showed genuine interest in her family and background, treating her mother with the same respect and attention he would give to any important person in his life. Maya's mother, despite her weakened condition, immediately recognized the depth of David's feelings for her daughter. During a private conversation while Maya was meeting with doctors, she gave David her wholehearted approval and blessing. "That girl has been taking care of everyone else her whole life," Maya's mother told David. "It's time someone took care of her. I can see that you love her truly, not just for what she can do for you, but for who she is. That's all I've ever wanted for her." The week David spent in Phoenix became a foundation for their relationship that was built on complete honesty, mutual support, and shared commitment to family values. They faced Maya's mother's illness together, making decisions as a team and supporting each other through the stress and uncertainty. When it came time for David to return to Seattle, the separation felt different than any goodbye Maya had experienced before. This wasn't an ending, but a brief interruption before the beginning of their new life together. "I'll be back next weekend to help you pack," David promised as they stood together at the airport. "And in 2 weeks, we'll have the Phoenix office operational, and you'll officially be Sterling Industries' Southwest Regional Coordinator." Maya smiled through her tears, still amazed at how completely her life had transformed. "I still can't believe this is all real." "Believe it," David said, kissing her gently. "We're going to build something beautiful together, Maya. Your mother's recovery, our relationship, the business expansion, all of it is going to work because we're facing it together." As David's plane disappeared into the Seattle sky, Maya felt a peace and confidence she had never experienced before. The desperate young woman who had fallen asleep in Sterling Industries' waiting room had been transformed not just by professional opportunity, but by genuine love and partnership. The challenges ahead were significant. Her mother's recovery would be lengthy. Establishing a new business operation would require intense focus, and building a relationship that bridged their different backgrounds would take ongoing effort. But Maya no longer felt overwhelmed by these challenges because she knew she wouldn't be facing them alone. 2 weeks later, Maya stood in the newly furnished Phoenix office of Sterling Industries, looking out at the desert landscape and marveling at the journey that had brought her to this moment. Her mother was making steady progress in her recovery. David was flying in that evening for the office's official opening, and their relationship was growing stronger with each passing day. The phone rang, and Maya answered with the professional confidence that had become second nature. Sterling Industries, Southwest Regional Office, Maya Rodriguez speaking. Hello, beautiful. David's voice came through the line, warm with affection. And pride. How does it feel to be running your own operation? Maya smiled, thinking about how far she had traveled from those desperate days of unemployment and uncertainty. It feels like home, she said. It feels like exactly where I'm supposed to be. Good, David replied, because I have a surprise. And for you, when I arrive tonight, something that will make our partnership official in every possible way. Maya's heart raced as she contemplated what David might mean, but she was no longer afraid of the unknown. Whatever surprises lay ahead, she knew they would face them together with love, trust, and unshakable commitment to each other's happiness and success. The story that had begun with exhaustion and desperation had become one of transformation, love, and the power of two people choosing to build something beautiful together despite the obstacles that tried to keep them apart. Maya Rodriguez and David Sterling had found in each other not just romantic love, but true partnership, and their future stretched ahead bright with possibility and promise. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.